Hi, my name is Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the government's attempts to deflect blame from their coronavirus first wave handling in a way that gives us no confidence that the second wave will run any more smoothly, much less be averted altogether. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, should we have a little bit of Moggy to cheer us up after a disastrous few days? Jacob Rees-Mogg, the leader of the House, a minister who is so awful, even by Boris Johnson's standards, that he had to be kept under wraps during the general election campaign for fear of him sinking their electability by opening his mouth. He's tried this week in Parliament to avoid drawing comparisons between the UK's handling of COVID and that of other countries. Now, there's nothing unusual in that. He's not alone in the government in doing that. A number of ministers, including the Prime Minister himself, have sought to say how unhelpful it is to draw international comparisons. Which is not untrue. It's deeply unhelpful to Boris Johnson and his government. But there are a couple of oddities with this position. The first of which is that, well, the government were drawing international comparisons every day for weeks, about 2 months straight, during the initial couple of months that the pandemic was hitting the UK. Oh, and absolutely loved to show just how the UK stacked up against other countries when you were talking about the death tolls and the number of cases and the deaths per million. Until that was no longer the case. All of a sudden then, international comparisons, which were not only being drawn during daily briefings, but happily tweeted by Conservative MPs on a daily basis as well, were no longer de rigueur. Secondly, doesn't stop the government still drawing its own international comparisons. I mean, they still do it all the time. Even in some of the Prime Minister's questions, I think, when, I know when Keir Starmer was seeking to draw these comparisons, Boris Johnson said, oh, you can't draw these comparisons. He would then draw comparisons himself in the same session. Both he and other ministers are always drawing international comparisons. Johnson did it himself this week when he challenged Keir Starmer to name a single country that had a working tracing app. A foolish challenge, which was rather easy to meet. But what brought on Moggy's deflection is a Labour MP was calling on Parliament to debate the way different countries have approached the pandemic in order to develop best practice and put ourselves in a position to be rather less dangerously incompetent in the instance of a second wave occurring later this year. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg at this suggestion said, well, I think you'll find there's all sorts of factors that could affect these figures, and then promptly blamed the weather as being a possible factor. Because, of course, Britain famously is the only country that actually has weather. He also said that the spread could have been influenced by the practices of individual cultures and societies. Those were his words. Now, I feel I have to say at this point, I completely agree with him. There are, for example, some cultures where people expect their government to take expert advice seriously and deal with an emergency in the best interests of its people. That is true. There are societies that did not ransack their health service over the past 10 years to the point where it couldn't even cope with the normal levels of health conditions, much less a deadly pandemic that was listed as the #1 threat to the nation for 10 years prior to it arriving. And the reason this focus on deflecting blame is the wrong way to go about things, of course, is that ministers are so busy focusing on a defensive strategy to protect themselves from blame that they are occupying all of their brain power, don't snigger, into working out how they can con people into thinking they did all they could. And to a certain section of the population, a fairly hefty section of the population, it's working. There's a lot of people quite happy to say, oh, well, what could he have done differently? Oh, he's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't. The problem, however, with that attitude is you will never improve the bad situation because it will just keep getting worse. Because you can't approach any bad situation until you are frankly acknowledging what is going wrong. And the pandemic is a bad situation in any country, but other countries are facing up to the mistakes, not all, but most. and have, as a result, been able to correct them. I mean, some of them have made pretty bad mistakes, but they've still faced up to them and therefore not done as badly as we have. Boris Johnson's crew don't do that. And although I'm happy to describe the second wave as still a speculative possibility because it hasn't happened yet, I see no rational way that it could possibly be averted without an effective vaccine or treatment becoming available rather quickly. I mean, you notice every time some group thinks they might have an idea for one, it's all in the right-wing papers, particularly the likes of the Express. They'll trumpet it, oh, this thing, and it's going to arrive by September. Remember, September, that's when they say it's going to arrive. We're going to have 1 million already distributed in September. Okay. Because the thing is, how do you control the virus? When you think about how, we know now, how do we control it? I'm not saying we've worked every little detail out, but we've seen that what countries have done and we've seen what works and what doesn't. If it's not out of control, you implement a rigorous and widespread test, track and isolate programme. But of course it is still out of control in the UK with 1,000 deaths a week and still, well, a recently leaked report saying that there's no reason to believe that the R value is below 1, but there is reason to believe that it is rising. So it's already 1 and rising. Despite what the government publicly say, their own information says otherwise. We also have many more people dying at the end of the lockdown than we did at the start. So, if it's out of control, what then? You impose a lockdown until it's under control, and then you swing in your test, track and isolate whilst easing the restrictions in a way that allows you to monitor the situation and reimpose them if necessary. Well, not only have we rapidly and deeply eased the restrictions, never mind what Boris Johnson says, we have rapidly and deeply eased the restrictions in a way that I cannot see them possibly being reimposed, but we don't even have the adequate test, trace and isolate programme in place. Now, when it comes to that programme, there are a number of problems that we face, which are not being faced up to. In fact, if people saw PMQs, you may have seen a clip that was widely shared on social media afterwards when Keir Starmer was explaining to the Prime Minister that he's not taking this seriously. He just gulped. He went. That was his response. The problems we've got. 1, the spread of infection is too high to use this programme. Even if we had an effective programme now, it's too high. We've got too many infections. It is understood that such a programme has a maximum capacity. It can only deal with so many new infections a day. We have too many. 2, the test is clearly well behind where it should be. This is evident from the fact that the government have refused to publish the number of people tested for over a month now. And this week voted down a motion to allow for the routine testing for healthcare workers earlier this week. Something that was promised by the government in early April. 3, the tracing part is beyond a joke. We gave 12 million quid to some mate of Dominic Cummings and we have nothing to show for it. Not just that it's being delayed, it has been abandoned. We are now apparently in talks with Germany to see if we can use theirs. You know, the German app that Boris Johnson said didn't even exist on Wednesday. Well, now the UK government say they're talking to Germany about potentially trying to use it and trying to adapt it for our use. 4, well, isolating. The problem there is we do have the isolating rules, but the system is a massive problem because as the restrictions are eased, more and more people are going to become infected. That will apply anywhere, even with places that are doing this properly. Now, what happens then is you would test people and then contact those that, when they test positive, they've been in contact with and tell them to isolate. But we won't be able to test all the people who develop symptoms because the testing regime clearly isn't up to it. And those who are tested and where you, I mean, without the tracing programme, we can't contact everyone that they've been in contact with. That's not possible. So who are the people that they would be able to say they've been in contact with at least? Work colleagues. It's the people they physically know. So work colleagues. So what you'll be doing is you'll be shutting down whole sections of the workforce. You know, you'll be shutting down schools, offices, hospital departments. All of this has already been happening, by the way. Not officers so much, but hospitals and hospital departments and schools have already had to close because of this. Now, if the infection were under better control, then this would still sort of happen, but you'd expect it to happen in pockets here and there. Annoying for the individual officers, schools and so on that have to shut, but a potentially limited impact on the overall national economy. But the sheer scale of the isolations that are going to be required, if our testing and tracing ever even approaches being able to contact people, is too scary to even think about. And finally, there is another measure that is absolutely vital, of course, in living with the virus until pharmaceutical solutions become available, if they ever do. That is, members of the public need to follow risk mitigating measures. Naturally, there is no chance of this now, and the government have completely abandoned control over the process. They abandoned that with their handling of the Dominic Cummings affair. Boris Johnson, who said that he trusted the common sense of the British public to get us through this, has now been attacking the British public for, in his words, taking too many liberties with the guidance and not observing social distancing, in the wake of the emergency that occurred in Bournemouth this week as a stupid number of people crammed themselves onto the sand and into the sea for no other purpose than to turn their skin red and, in some cases, pick fights. Still, could be worse. Just wait till the pubs are open. But there it is. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.